human intelligence and writing, and what writing did to kind of create a new step or plateau in the development of our mind's consciousness,
Yeah.
intelligence, so forth. Start with that.
All right. Well, first of all, we have to think about the role of language in cognition and in society generally. And I think most biologists make a serious mistake. They think that human language is just a kind of a more elaborate form of animal signaling system. And of course, that's completely wrong. Languages have the capacity to represent in a way that animal signaling systems don't have. Animals can signal danger or sexual desire or a few things like that, but they cannot get this articulated form of precise representation that we get in human languages. So it's the big jump-off point is between animal signaling and human languages. Human languages have these remarkable capacities that they are compositional. That is, you can figure out the meaning of the utterance from the meanings of the parts and the way they're composed. And human languages also involve this remarkable ability of commitment. Humans commit themselves to doing something when they make a promise. They commit themselves to something being the case when they make a statement. And there's nothing like that in animal signaling. Okay, now that's the basics of language: compositionality, representation, and commitment. Keep those three in mind. But now when we move to written language, you get another big jump off, because you can now do things with compositionality, commitment, and representation that you can't do with spoken language. You now start to create not just a more elaborate animal society, you start now to create civilization. So once you have written language, you can have long-term commitments that go over a generation. You can have commandments, like the Ten Commandments, that go on for millennia. But furthermore, and this is where it really gets exciting, is you can now create the forms of civilization that are enduring. And I'm thinking not of just of great art and literature, but of money, property, government, marriage, universities, textbooks, all of the elaborate systems that language has that we can encode in written language that enable us to create an elaborate civilization that is based on our capacity to represent and to create enduring representations. So that the bottom line of this is that the big step between us and animals is indeed language, but the big step between civilization and more primitive forms of human society is written language. Once you have written language, you have the capacity not just for creating a civilization, but getting these accretions, where the elements of civilization then build on earlier elements of civilization, and those build on yet earlier elements of civilization until you get where we are today. It's right as far as it goes to say that language, that written language enables civilization, but I would go a further step and say it doesn't just enable it in the sense of making it possible, but rather it constitutes it. It is a constitutive element of civilization, in that you cannot have what we can think of as the defining social institutions of civilization without having written language. You cannot have universities and schools, but not just the pedagogical institutions, but you can't even have money or private property or governments or national elections, or for that matter, cocktail parties and marriages. To have all of those, you can't even have a summer vacation or a lawsuit without written language. So written language is where language acquires not just a much greater creative power, but an enduring power, because you can create these wonderful writings that survive, that go on and get repeated. Think of the Constitution of the United States or the Declaration of Independence.
That's the infrastructure.
Indeed, it is the infrastructure, but it isn't just the infrastructure of roads and bridges. It's the infrastructure of human civilization itself.
In addition to this external dimension of the effect of writing on civilization, there's another effect, which is now writing has become a virtual reality environment.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
who we are, how we think, how we remember, how we organize our thoughts, and so forth.
The best remark ever made in this regard was made by the French, rather cynical French philosopher of the 18th century, La Rochefoucauld. And he said, very few people would ever fall in love if they never read about it. And he's on to something there. Now we'd have to add if they didn't see it on television and in the movies and so on. But the point is this: People don't just get born into how to live as human beings. They have to learn how to live as human beings. Much of their learning, indeed almost all of their learning, is by way of language. Some is by way of brute animal imitation. But once you get really going with advanced forms of civilization, like falling in love or becoming a doctor, then you must have written language. So the forms of civilization that we think of as essential to the distinction between humans and other forms of animal life require advanced institutional structures. You and I spend our lives locked into institutional structures. I spend my life in a university. You spend your life engaged in various kinds of linguistic and technological enterprises. And all of those require language, but particularly the advanced human forms of civilization, like universities and like governments and like national elections. All of those require writing.
So this writing, the development of writing and the complexity that's come with writing and the dimensions with which writing can refer to itself and so forth, has actually changed the oral language.
Oh, well, it's changed. Of course, it's changed the way we think and talk. I can't have the kinds of feelings that I have without language, but I can't have those without writing. So I mentioned falling in love, but there are all kinds of other emotions that you cannot have without some way to articulate those, and that requires social forms of articulation, and they require written forms of articulation. So, for example, some of my friends claim that they suffer, let's say, the angst of post-industrial man under late capitalism. Now, I don't suffer from that. If I did, I'd run out and buy a beer. But people who do suffer from the angst of post-industrial man under late capitalism, you got to have words to do that. And in fact, you got to be able to string a lot of words together to have that. I have a very intelligent dog named Gilbert. As I watch Gilbert there snoring away, I know he's not suffering the angst of post-industrial canine in late capitalism. That's just not a problem for Gilbert. And it would be oversimplifying it to say it's because the damn dog can't read. But that's part of his problem, is that his capacity for expressing and articulating is very limited. But the remarkable thing, and I haven't explained this yet, but I think you're aware of it, is that human language has this capacity, not just that it has a much more expressive power than other forms of representation, but that the expressive power builds on the expressive power. You get a snowball effect. So once the kid gets a few words, that enables him to build more words. And then once he's got more words, he can build more complex sentences. And those more complex sentences enable him to accumulate yet more words. And so you get this remarkable exponential growth capacity of human representation, and there's nothing like written language. Think of the damned computational technology. For most of us, it is a device for conveying and composing strings of words. There's a certain irony in that, because the damn computers were invented for number crunchers. See, they were invented as fancy arithmetical things, but I would say most computing that's done today, I mean, I haven't got any hard statistics on this, but my bet is most computing that's done today is done by people like you and me using word processing, using email, using devices for composing and manipulating and correcting and preserving the written word on the computer. The computer has made it, and that was never intended that way, but the computer has made it just a hell of a lot easier to write.